Hey nerds, just Jamie here with
your friend Claude.
And this is Nerd Bomber vs. Movies, the show where two movies fight and we pick a winner. Today's matchup is kind of on the nose. You can already see them on the table. We have 1975's Jaws and 1993's Jurassic Park, both creature features directed by Steven Spielberg and featuring a score done by John Williams. So the connections here are not as esoteric as they sometimes are on the show. Before we get started, any initial thoughts on this matchup?
Well, they both start with J.
That's the important thing.
And they both have a lot of sharp teeth.
Mm-hmm.
I like this pairing. I like both of these movies. I like one of them more than the other. But the beauty of this show is that we get to kind of pay greater attention to movies that we otherwise wouldn't have taken such a deep look at.
Mm-hmm.
And it's surprising, I think you'll see, just how similar these movies really are.
It's really true. I also happen to like both of these movies and like one more than the other. In case it's not obvious which one, I'll keep that secret for now. One of these movies actually happens to be my number one favorite movie. That's right, undefeated and unchallenged really so far. But we'll see how it goes. Again, like you said, the point of the show is to kind of bring some kind of objectivity to things. So we'll see where that takes us. In just a minute, I'm going to be back by myself with the basics for these two movies, and Claude's going to move aside.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill. A mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws. Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
From the best-selling novel, Jaws, rated PG, may be too intense for younger children.
All right, I'm back as I said I would be, and we're going to start with Jaws from 1975. Directing this movie, as I said earlier, we have Steven Spielberg. Do I really have to go over the filmography? It's big, it's significant. He's done a lot of really cool things, and I think most of us know what they are. The movie was written by Peter Benchley, who also wrote the novel, and Carl Gottlieb, who's mostly only known for this and the sequels to this, as well as a movie called Caveman with Ringo Starr, so interesting writing team there. Music, again, as I mentioned earlier, John Williams. Again, must I go over the filmography? He's one of the most significant movie score composers of all time, including this, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, etc. All right, cast. We'll start off with the character Chief Martin Brody, played by Roy Scheider. He is known mostly for this film, as well as The French Connection and the 90s action sci-fi TV show Sequest DSV. Richard Dreyfuss is in this movie. He plays marine biologist Matt Hooper. Richard Dreyfuss, also big-time career. He was in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Mr. Holland's Opus, a ton of other films. Again, pretty significant Hollywood career for that guy. Robert Shaw is here. He plays Shark Hunter Quint. He did a lot of movies before this. He actually died a couple of years after this movie was released. He was in things like The Taking of Pelham 123, The Sting, and Force 10 from Navarone. Playing Chief Brody's wife, Ellen, is Lorraine Gary. She's mostly known for this and a lot of episodes of TV, mostly as recurring characters, sometimes single episode one-offs. Playing Mayor Vaughn, we have Murray Hamilton. He's mostly known, again, for this movie, as well as things like Brubaker and the Amityville Horror. That's basically it for the main cast. Kind of a condensed cast, very tight movie we have here. All right, so the rights to Benchley's book were actually purchased before it even came out in 1973 by Universal Pictures. In return for changing much of the first two acts of the book, Benchley was actually given an opportunity to write the first draft of the script because they wanted to simplify the first two acts. Later, Gottlieb was brought in to bring levity to the stories and characters because Spielberg found them to sometimes be a little bit unlikable. Eventually, Gottlieb became known as the primary screenwriter, and a lot of specific scenes he would actually finish writing the night before they shot those scenes. The shark that they used, the mechanical shark they used, was known as Bruce, became sort of notoriously hard to work with, did not often operate correctly, but ultimately this led to what is looked at as a strength of the film, which is the opportunities for the viewer to see the shark are actually somewhat limited. All right, pop culture footprint, huge! The film is regularly recognized as one of the best of all time, the score as one of the best scores of all time, and the shark has become known as one of the best movie monsters of all time. At the time, the film was hugely financially successful. You'll see that in a minute. And the IP crossed over into virtually all forms of media, both then and now. There have been, as I said earlier, the questionable sequels, but there was also board games, video games, toys, comics, obviously the novel. And there is absolutely no shortage of merch on the market still today for this film. You can go out and find some right now.
On June 11th, Universal Pictures invites you
Hey, look at this.
to discover the wonder,
Can I touch it?
sure, experience the power,
You feel that?
and live an adventure 65 million years in the making. Jurassic Park, rated PG-13, starts Friday, June 11th at theaters everywhere.
All right, moving on to Jurassic Park, 1993. Again, we have directing Steven Spielberg. That name sounds familiar. I'm not going to go through the filmography because you should know it if you're watching this show. This film was written by Michael Crichton, again, a novelist, and this movie is based on a novel, and co-written by David Koepp, who's a big-time Hollywood screenwriter. He's done things like Death Becomes Her, Carlito's Way, The Shadow, Mission Impossible, several Indiana Jones sequels. You get the idea. Very successful big-time Hollywood writer joining up with Crichton here to make this screenplay happen. All right, and then we have the music, and once again, we have John Williams. I mean, come on. Again, like I said earlier, one of the, probably the most successful Hollywood score composer of all time. All right, cast, we have Sam Neill as Dr. Alan Grant. He's been in things like Possessed, Event Horizon, At the Mouth of Madness. Most of the time he plays horror weirdos, but in this movie he's more of an action star. Starring as Dr. Ellie Sattler, we have Laura Dern. She's known for things like Wild at Heart, October Sky, The Fault in Our Stars, Little Women. Big-time award-winning person we got here in the cast. All right, moving on to Dr. Ian Malcolm, as played by Jeff Goldblum. Goldblum's shown up on the show before. He's known for Buckaroo Banzai, The Fly, Independence Day, and many other films. We also have Richard Attenborough playing John Hammond, the billionaire who opens Jurassic Park. Attenborough did a lot of movies, but he was actually away from acting for a number of years. He was doing a lot of directing before coming back to acting to do this film with Spielberg. We also have Wayne Knight playing Dennis Nedry. He's known mostly for JFK, Space Jam, and playing Newman on Seinfeld. All right, we'll go and talk about some of the production stuff now. So, the novel Jurassic Park was released in 1990, but Crichton first actually conceived the story as a film as early as 1983, just couldn't make it happen. Spielberg became aware of the novel before its publication, and Universal Pictures bought the rights, and they outbid Tim Burton at Warner Brothers, Joe Dante at 20th Century Fox, and Richard Donner at Columbia. Spielberg, at this time, really wanted to direct Schindler's List, and he was basically given a green light for that film on the condition that he directed Jurassic Park. So he basically did both almost simultaneously. There was a lot of pre-production going on for Schindler's List as he was making Jurassic Park. Filming for this movie began in August of 1992 after 25 months in production and wrapped in November of the same year. All right, pop culture footprint for Jurassic Park. Again, huge. This film was a box office sensation. Again, you'll see those numbers in a minute. It actually changed the trajectory, that is, of big budget Hollywood filmmaking in Hollywood for a long time to come. And again, like Jaws, in addition to the novel, there have been board games, video games, toys, comics, and several, in this case, more successful sequels. All right, that's it for the basics. And at this time, Claude's going to come back to the center seat and give you the tale of the tape.
Greetings, fight fans and movie buffs. I'm your friend Claude here with the tale of the tape for our main event of the evening between Jaws and Jurassic Park. Guess where we're starting? Distributing studio? Great guess. And these are evenly matched. Both Universal Studios pictures. And what a great way to start a movie battle. For what it's worth, I have gone to Universal and ridden both rides for both of these movies. Moving down to the ratings, Jaws is PG because in the 70s, all you had was PG to see anything but a cartoon. And Jurassic Park is PG-13. And let's see how the release dates line up. These both came out almost at the same time. In the month of June, we have June 20th, 1975 for Jaws, and June 11th, 1993 for Jurassic Park. In terms of the running time, still very close. Jaws comes in at a length of 130 minutes, whereas Jurassic Park, just below that at 127 minutes. Still a very close call. Let's look at the budget. Jaws was made for a scant $9 million. Decent by 70s standards. As far as Jurassic Park, they had $63 million to work with. And there's a bit of a difference there. But what did they do with that money? Well, Jaws turned $9 million into $476.5 million. It's no secret to any, even casual movie buff, that Jaws kind of paved the way for the summer blockbuster, for this type of release, for this type of giant profit margin in terms of a summer movie. Jurassic Park took that mold, broke it, and remade a new one because they took $63 million and turned that into $914 million. Which would later go on through, re-releases and other ways of global tallying to crack the $1 billion mark. And I think these may be the two most smashingly successful movies we've ever put up against each other on this show. So, if this were, maybe more than any other films that we've done, if this were a real life fight, this is the one I'd want to see. So with that said, let's see how it all shakes out when we open the doors and settle some scores.
All right, we're back, and it's time to talk about some actual scores. I think we're going to start with Jaws, and I suppose I will go first. As always, we start with visuals. I should also mention that. I'm giving the visuals for Jaws an 8, a very high score. At the time, fairly groundbreaking. As I mentioned in the basics, that mechanical shark didn't always work so well, but again, I do think it actually helped to not have the shark front and center quite as much as maybe they even intended to.
100%.
Everybody remembers the shark being up on the boat, which is fine. That might be one of the weaker shots in terms of visuals. I think it works really well in terms of character work. I think the most effective shot for me is there's a kind of a shark attack that happens just below the surface of the water, and you just see the surface, and then the shark comes into view, passes by, never breaks the surface.
Right.
That is a very eerie visual, and I thought very well pulled off. But another reason I gave it a high score for visuals isn't just about the shark or the boat or anything like that. It's about the fact that a lot of this movie takes place in the mundanity of, Amity Island.
Yeah.
And it's never boring to look at, even though that's the case.
Right.
When they're just at the house, at the store, at the police station, on the street, on the ferry, on the beach. All very normal, everyday stuff, but always interesting and not unpleasing to the eye. So when you can make sort of the mundane look interesting, and then you just add to that with some cool effects, cool sort of extraordinary visuals, then you end up with a high score like an 8.
I agree with absolutely everything said. And allow me to pile on the praise even more. Because I give Jaws a visual score of 8.5. It's for everything you just said, but it's also because, I guess, little moments in between the big stuff. I also like to look at certain aspects of the cinematography. Certain, lens choices that stand out. I think they call that a dolly zoom.
Yeah.
Stole that from Alfred Hitchcock, I think. But Yeah, that stands out. It's used perfectly. That's the thing. It's not just something like a gimmicky camera move or lens choice, but it's used at a moment that is absolutely ideal for it. Mm-hmm. So you have kind of that double whammy of effectiveness. And there's also a moment that sticks out for me where it's like the transition between them on the boat, kind of frustrated, and right as they go into putting together the shark cage, it's like a transition that kind of uses the cage. It goes from like, well, do you have any better ideas or whatever, and then it just all of a sudden like the cage pieces start coming like either towards or away from the camera, but you just kind of see like this cage perspective of them putting it together. Mm-hmm. It's a very like economical but also effective visual shot. And then I want to give a nod to the cinematographer Bill Butler, who makes this movie just pretty, just beautiful to look at. Is hugely responsible for the mundane looking nice and for the spectacle looking nice. A lot of those sunset boat shots on the water, and just, I mean, you could rattle it off. There's a series called Every Frame a Painting, and I would have to nominate this movie for that because it sort of fits the bill. So you got all that, and I have to go half a notch higher, 8.5 for visuals of Jaws.
Fair enough. All right, so we're going to move over to Jurassic Park now. I'm going to give Jurassic Park a very high score for visuals, among the highest I've ever given in any category for any movie, and it is getting a 9.5, almost to the top of the scale. Obviously, this movie is known for its visuals. It changed everything about the way movies were made. Hollywood didn't always take the right lessons from those from those changes, but you can't deny its influence. The CGI in Jurassic Park is, at the time of this recording, is 30 years old.
Yep.
And it has aged incredibly well. That's not to say that it's flawless, right. But there are very few times you can really pick it apart. The only thing I can really pick apart, I think, in terms of the visuals, is the CGI shots of the Brachiosaurus. And I think that's because the dinosaur is so big and so close to the screen that you can see that it's not rendered at maybe a high enough resolution for the size of it.
Yeah.
But that is a giant dinosaur rendered in CGI in broad daylight in 1993. They weren't hiding anything in shadows or rain.
That's really kind of the first one you see, right?
It's the first dinosaur you fully see,
yeah.
Yes. Now, the T-Rex scenes, I think, are still flawless. I don't think there's really any flaw in the CGI for the T-Rex scene. There they are in the night and the rain. But despite that fact, the dinosaur's not hidden. Like, you see the whole thing several times. And there are other impressive shots of CGI. There are incredible animatronics, a full-size Tyrannosaurus Rex animatronic that moved well, did not hitch and bounce or anything like that. Also, and a lot of people don't realize this, there are some shots, not all, but there are some shots of the raptors that are people in suits. It's some of the most impressive monster suits ever done in a movie because the human form is completely concealed. You don't see the human silhouette. Off the top of my head, I can't think of another monster suit effect where you don't see the fact that it's a humanoid figure in the suit. Very, very impressive work. But it's not even all about that. This movie is interesting because it's not going to make anything hard to see. Everything is brightly lit. Yeah. In some ways, it might be not as cinematographically interesting as Jaws. I don't mean to say that that's a negative thing. I mean to say that it's actually a positive thing because shooting a movie like that can point you down a path of cheapness almost. Mm-hmm. There's an awful lot of sort of B-action movies and things like that were made for cable that are brightly lit and don't look very good.
Right.
This movie looks very good. So it has a lot going for it. Obviously, it has the effects. Almost every kind of special effect except for stop motion. Sorry, Phil Tippett. But he was the dinosaur. What did they credit him as? Like the dinosaur wrangler or something. Yeah. He was actually still important. He wasn't just like cast aside when they didn't use his go motion. He helped them build the digital armatures so that the creatures moved naturally, even in a CGI environment.
Yeah.
Because that's something that you can really fail at. If you don't know how an animal moves, it'll still look fake, even if it's rendered well. So again, CGI, animatronics, guy in suit technology, sweeping vistas of where Jurassic Park takes place. I think it's technically Hawaii.
Yeah.
And also just interesting set design, the visitor center, the Jeeps, the SUVs, the Triceratops puppet. Everything is just top notch. I have no complaints. Even the negative thing I said about the rendering on the Brachiosaurus is not a negative thing because the movie is 30 years old. And I can only think of one other movie of anywhere near this kind of vintage where the CGI effects have really held up this well. That would be Starship Troopers with the bug scenes. But this movie is even older than that, and to have the effects hold up this well, they haven't been altered and messed with over the years. They haven't been updated. They are what they are from 1993, and they still hold up, so it's incredible. But again, it's not all about that. It's about the combination of things that brings me to a 9.5 among the highest scores I've ever gotten. Claude, why don't you talk for a while?
Well, I have to give it a lower score. I'm going to give the visuals in Jurassic Park a 9.
All the way down to a 9.
Way down. There's no arguing against the legacy that this movie has on visual effects in film for everything that's come after it for the last 30 years. And I mean, yeah, to this day, it is still the gold standard for just balancing the visual effects in a movie in the right way, in the right amounts. And, you know, there's been leaps and bounds made in computer technology since then. But, you know, you hit a point of diminishing returns where they're almost, in a lot of ways, working against themselves now. And also, this movie was given the time and the attention to detail and the ability to really, you know, do everything to the best of its abilities. And movies today aren't made that way, especially with the effects. They're often farmed out to the highest bidder on a deadline. But it is incredible. I know we both talked extensively already about the visual effects, about the computer images, but it's just incredible to really see how good it still looks in 2023. It's interesting that you mention how things can look cheap, because that's probably my only visual shortcoming with this, is that certain moments, I don't know that I would use the word cheap, but certain moments just feel very much of the 90s, and I don't know if that's just a certain evolution in the type of film being used, or the cameras, or just the aspects of the production that are a bit more intangible. But initially, I wanted to compare it to something like Anaconda, particularly the intro scene of Jurassic Park. Always stuck out for me as feeling almost like from a different movie, just the way it looks and the vibe it has. And it's interesting because the director of photography for this movie has mostly done things that are very like popcorn movie, very, very, you know, fun, satisfying, feel-good movies, great movies. Back to the Future trilogy, Roger Rabbit, things like that. Where the cinematographer for Jaws has done, you know, nice looking, like almost award-worthy movies, the Rocky films. He did Grease, and he did a little movie called Anaconda. So, interesting as it is that everybody seems to have a body of work and an exception to that.
Yes.
So, for the pure poetic justice factor of that observation, I decided to share that with you. So take that for what it is. My score still stands because the effects are so great, because anything I can come up with to knock this movie in this category is absolutely a nitpick. Mm-hmm. This movie gets a 9 in the visuals all day. Super solid. High level.
Absolutely. Speaking
of high level, let's go back to Jaws and look at the performances. I give those a 9.5. To me, the characters in this movie are so well defined that they feel like such real people. Maybe you don't know a chief of police in your life, or a marine biologist, or a surly sailor, but the way they're presented makes them so relatable that you feel like you're kind of on this journey with them by the end of the movie. Hell, by the middle of the movie. The casting for every role pretty much is just so perfect. Some of it is a happy accident. Some of that is kind of the really smart choice and the ability in this movie to use a lot of local talent that are not actors. They're real people. A lot of the fisherman scene and like the posse scenes where they're all going out to catch the shark and just having banter with each other, those are just regular guys. Mm-hmm. And that's some of like the most interesting character stuff in the movie. The woman whose son unfortunately gets eaten by Jaws, and her son are both local amateur talent, and they're used in the right way to not expose that, but for maximum effectiveness. And I just think that like the performances and like the talent chosen for the specific roles was so well assigned. There's a certain amount of ad-libbing going on here, and again, that kind of when you've chosen talent carefully for their role, you can kind of let them off the leash a little bit more, and a lot of times you get these just incredible, memorable moments. And Robert Shaw gives many of them in this movie. His speech about the Indianapolis, it wasn't off the cuff, but it was kind of his contribution. It wasn't in the script. He brought that to the table. Again, we'll get, I guess, more into the quotes within the writing, but again, some of these aren't written. So, and Jaws is, just to give you a writing spoiler, one of the most quotable movies of all time. So across the board, I feel like it's a home run, 9.5 for the performances of Jaws.
All right, I'm up. I'm also giving a very high score. It's not a 9.5. I'm giving it an 8.5. So we're kind of sky high on this episode in general. So 8.5 seems like it's, but I mean, that is a really good score.
There's really no losers here.
I don't disagree with anything you said. I think that the cast is more, I mentioned this earlier, the cast is more condensed in this film. It's not really an ensemble. The bit players are doing their part, and they're doing it very well, as you mentioned. I actually didn't remember, before my rewatch, I didn't remember a lot of that sort of like the chaotic, all the local fishermen going out to earn their reward by killing the shark. I didn't really remember those scenes.
Right.
And so it was interesting to see all those little interactions happening on screen at different levels.
Right.
But really, of course, this movie comes down to the three guys.
Yep.
Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, Robert Shaw. And I think Robert Shaw is largely remembered for a lot of his dramatic moments. You mentioned the Indianapolis speech. Of course, there's the scratching on the chalkboard thing. But when those three men are in a scene together, it's a very well-balanced formula.
Yeah.
Nobody's getting dominated. They're all kind of doing their part. Richard Dreyfuss's character kind of seems like this, young, impressionable scientist. Maybe he's not up for hanging around with these harder-nosed people, but he ends up keeping up with them and kind of earning his respect from the others.
Right.
Scheider is a police chief, so he's a respectable person, but he's a little bit out of his element out in the open sea with this, like you said, a surly ship captain. Right. So Robert Shaw kind of dominates them, but they earn their respect from him, and it becomes this interesting sort of like three-way dance. And a lot of those scenes, especially around the table in the boat where they're comparing their scars and whatnot, that's another famous scene. And they're all really on an even playing field on that scene, which was good to see. I enjoyed watching that stuff. I think that the performances in this movie, again, I'm only giving it an 8.5. But that score is really spiked based on the strength of like these three performances for that second sort of, well, I guess it's really the third act. It's most of the second half of the movie. It's just those three guys on the ship. you don't really get a look back at what's happening on the island and what's going on with those characters.
No.
Once they're on the Orca, the movie is on the Orca.
Yep.
And the movie never feels small or in any way, that is in no way a detriment.
Right.
And it's carried by the strength of those performances of those three guys. So, again, not as high as your score, but a very high score of 8.5.
Well, I suppose it's only fair that we take a look at the performances for Jurassic Park now.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to tell you that I give these an 8. Again, I mean, we're really not going to get all that low. I don't feel like I like these performances clearly less than I like the Jaws performances. But to get an 8 out of 10 for any reason, I mean, it's phenomenal. I will say that the reason I score this less than I score Jaws for performances comes down to things like, I feel like the characters in this movie, in general, you know, across the spectrum of the ensemble, are just a little more stereotypish / tropey, I guess. And maybe some of them are a little more hammy. You don't have this, like... There's an immersive quality to the performances in Jaws where you know, I said before, where you kind of feel like you really know these people and you can identify with them. And in Jurassic Park, I feel that it's more, you've seen them before, but you don't necessarily identify. Mm-hmm. And some of that's the nature of you know, the roles. I mean, these are mostly blue-collar characters in Jaws, kind of more relatable to the everyman, whereas we're talking different levels of scientists in Jurassic Park and geneticists and whatever else they are. So they're a little less relatable just by that fact. But the performances, I feel, kind of kept them a little more on the surface than Jaws were. Also, I think it's a necessary part of the story being told in Jurassic Park, but maybe a bit of a mistake in a way to give the child actors so much more focus and screen time and responsibility to the story. Because, I mean, they're fine, but it's not like they're not among the strongest members of the cast. So because they get so much more weight, it kind of drags everything down a little bit as far as how you would score it for me. But those are really the only nitpicks I have. And again, 8 is very, very strong.
Yeah.
So that's my score for Jurassic Park.
All right, so in a surprise to everybody, I'm actually going down a little bit. I'm going to a 7.5 for performances for Jurassic Park. And I don't disagree with anything you said. I think a big part of it is, yes, I think these actors are being asked to play more archetypal characters. There's not a lot of character growth for them. There are in some cases, but it's a little bit more tropey, as you said. I mean, you have sort of like, and it's also interesting you said like they're less relatable because you have a billionaire and a bunch of, you know, doctors, PhDs, and a lawyer, you know, and a big game hunter. I mean, so yeah, none of these people are very necessarily connectable. I'd say the most relatable character in the whole movie is Ray Arnold, played by Samuel L. Jackson, because he's the most just like annoyed and put out by the entire situation without being campy and over the top about it. He's just doing this, you know. But nevertheless, I mean, 7.5 is not a bad score. I think another part of why the actors maybe didn't get quite as much chance to really bite into these characters, because you have a lot of skilled performers in this movie. For sure. Laura Dern is an award winner. Sam Neill. I mean, all these people can do their jobs very well. But this is an ensemble cast, and I hinted at that when I mentioned how Jaws is a very condensed cast, especially at the end of the movie when you just have the 3 guys on the boat. This movie is jumping back and forth between different groups of people, and everybody kind of has their, 20 minutes of screen time when you probably break it all up, you know?
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of opportunity for a lot of these people to really bite into something serious. Richard Attenborough has a nice little scene. He talks about his past when he comes to America and does his little flea circus. And of course, like, Jeff Goldblum stands out, but that's a different kind of thing. You know, it's just that Jeff Goldblum energy. And everybody else is fine, but nobody else really necessarily has those strong moments. I was actually going to point to the kids as a strong point relative to what you expect out of child actors in most of these cases.
That's fair.
I think they carry their weight about as well as you can expect. The highest point of child acting is probably like Stand By Me or The Goonies. And this movie's probably like a grade below that, but I mean, in terms of like the child performers. But I mean, I don't see that as a detriment. I actually see it as a strength.
Or Spielberg's other movie, E.T., which you don't like.
I don't. It's not that I don't like it. Let's not go there. It's not that I don't like it. But these movies, they're not weak performances relative to what you expect. So I don't see that as a detriment necessarily.
That's fair.
But yeah, I think mostly it comes down to just like the actors not having as much opportunity because the movie's not necessarily about that as much. So that's really what it comes down to. But still, 7.5 in almost any case is not a bad score. All right, having said that, let's move into writing now. So we'll switch back over to Jaws. I'm going back up the scale a little bit. I'm going 8.5, so another really high score in this episode. It's nearly flawless. A lot of what we talked about with visuals and performance, it's all connected, obviously. These things should be connected. But a lot of it has to do with the writing, too, because
right.
The movie respects, again, I talked about the mundane scenes visually. The movie respects those scenes in terms of the writing too. So those interesting interactions happen. Good performances. A part of that is good writing. So it's not just the three guys in the boat. It's also the scenes at home and as I mentioned earlier, at the sheriff's office, and at the beach, and on the streets, and whatever it is. Everything's well written, and the conversation is very naturalistic. This is a very sort of naturally flowing movie. It comes from that sort of a little bit of that ad-lib quality of some scenes. It comes from that. Part of that formula is that you have more blue-collar people, and so the dialogue doesn't have to be as elevated, as philosophical. So it all comes off as very natural and relatable and also well-performed. But another piece of writing to me is always how a movie feels when you watch it. This movie is 130 minutes, and it does not at all overstay its welcome. No. I mean, it is a breezy watch at 130 minutes, and to me, that is also a credit to good writing when you can make 2 hours and 10 minutes go by and it just feels like you're watching, 100-minute movie, 110-minute movie. It really, really flows well. And that is a big part of writing too, is the pacing of a movie. I think that also knowing what I know now about the pre-production and the writing, the work that went into writing the script, to streamline everything that was happening in the first two acts and have it bottleneck into the final act when they're on the boat, really well done. I think you didn't need a lot of subplots going on. I've never read the book, to be fair. But in a movie, I think that you would have ended up with something more like a Jurassic Park. It wouldn't have been a bad thing, but it might have taken the focus away from where it needed to be if you had this huge ensemble.
Yeah.
Intertwining throughout the whole length of the movie. I think it's good that they let things kind of stay simple and lead you to that third act.
Right.
My final point, mentioned earlier, part of this was that because the shark was hard to work with. Part of that was out of necessity. Right. But then also, you have to write your way in and out of that. If you're going to say the shark doesn't work, how are we going to write around it?
Yep.
And they did so successfully. It's seamless. You don't get a sense that they wanted to do any more than what they did. What you see on screen feels like it's right.
Yeah.
And it was intentional. And the fact that they had to sort of adapt to those limitations to make that happen, and it still comes off as well as it does, again, is a credit to that writing. So 8.5, very high score. Why don't you take it?
As far as Jaws and what I would give it for writing, I give it a 9. Because it's not perfect, but it is as good as anyone could ever hope to do a screenplay for a film, I feel like. And a lot of that is a lot of what you said, but I feel like it's also in details like the way exposition is handled. When Chief Brody is kind of first introduced and he kind of comes into his office, I mean, you very quickly you get informed that he's the chief of police, he's pretty new to the job, he doesn't like the water, doesn't have a lot of experience with sharks. It's all kind of like bang, bang, bang set up right there, and it doesn't feel like, hey, this guy has these 3 attributes that you should know about. Not at all. It just feels, again, like you said, very naturalistic. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge chunk of impressing me on top of everything you said. I also feel like, I mean, again, maybe it's a result of having so many blue-collar characters and settings, but just it's so, the story and the dialogue are so grounded in realism, that it creates this like really sturdy foundation for the more fantastic elements. You know, this shark that's larger than anything could exist in nature, and smarter than any sea creature has been known to be ever. But you can buy into that because that foundation is so grounded. It's not, you know, it's sort of frosting on the cake instead of frosting on frosting, I guess. And those characters are also given, certainly the main characters, but you know, a lot of the characters in the movie kind of, they feel really well thought out, but certainly the three main characters are given such a strong journey, such a well-developed story arc for each of their stories. I feel it's kind of rare to see everybody get such a good payoff, or everybody, even if it's not like an explicit payoff, you feel that
Quint might disagree.
Well, I mean, he met a very appropriate end.
Yes.
It was a beautiful bow on the vicious present, I guess. You know, there's a poetic quality to that even.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody feels just fully fleshed out, and it's really satisfying. So, for all those reasons, I gotta give the rating of Jaws a 9.
All right. So we're going to move over to Jurassic Park now. I'm going to downgrade from a 9. I'm even going to downgrade from my own 8.5 for Jaws for Jurassic Park. I'm going to give it an 8. Again, still a very good score. The movies diverge in their similarities here a little bit. And a lot of what you said is an exact sort of opposition to what Jurassic Park does. I'm going to start with exposition. This movie is not subtle at all with its exposition. In fact, it gives you exposition in the form of an animated sequence, but the context of it works so well.
I like it though, yeah.
It's perfect. It's like, we're going to put this in front of you, but there's such a good reason. This Jurassic Park is supposed to be a tourist destination. It's a theme park. It's a game preserve.
Yep.
It's intended that guests will come and sit and watch this presentation. So let's show it to you so you can see how this park works.
Right.
The story holds the reason for the exposition perfectly.
Yep.
And it gives you most of what you need. There's another scene of exposition that's a little bit less subtle even than that, or a little bit more awkwardly handled when they find the eggs and Dr. Grant explains about frogs can switch sexes and now they, so that's not quite as well handled. Switching over to pacing for a second, again, you have a longish movie here, almost 130. It's 127 minutes, so 3 minutes shorter than Jaws. But again, to me, no sense that it overstays its welcome. It moves right along, goes from the opening scene. Let's introduce these characters. We're on the park. We're going to show you the park, and now disaster. And all those steps make perfect sense. I don't feel like it ever slows down because even though it's almost 130 minutes, the movie can be broken down into these segments that are only maybe 10 minutes apiece. Mm-hmm. To bring it back around, good pacing, good sequence of events in a pulpy style, obvious non-subtle exposition put in a context that makes perfect sense. In a lot of these ways, it's a very unique movie, and I think some of these qualities are a little bit overlooked. And for all these reasons, I'm giving it an 8.
Well, I am also going to have to give the writing in Jurassic Park an 8. It's, again, a lot of the same reasons. I feel like it's less compelling. It's less easy to get into, accessible, I suppose. And again, I think a lot of that comes from the nature of the subject matter, of the type of characters and the environment that we're dealing with. I guess just the nature of the topic is really great for people who have some amount of knowledge of archaeology, of dinosaurs, of
Paleontology.
Now you know why it's harder for me to get into. It's another really well adapted novel, and it's so interesting to me that both authors were co-writers in these movies. It's nice to see that work. Sometimes that'll happen and it doesn't work so well in movies, and sometimes it's great. I think it's an asset in both of these cases. I do think that the direction that they chose to go with Jaws was just a little bit better executed. And again, I mean, there's no shortage of quotes in this movie either. I didn't really mention that in the specific writing section of Jaws, but I did in another section. That, I mean, Jaws is probably at least 1A or number 2 of most quoted movies of all time. But Jurassic Park is maybe not right up there, but it's got to be top 10.
Sure.
And to have maybe 2 of those movies, to have one of those movies in your career as a director is nice. To have 2 of them is insane, and I think you could probably argue that there's at least 3 or 4 in Spielberg's career.
Absolutely.
There are, again, as you know, there are certain scenes that you just have to write. Some of the jargon, some of the dialogue, some of the, inner workings, the more sciencey stuff. I don't think it's clumsy or anything like that. I just think that it's an issue that has to be dealt with. So, for those reasons, I give it the pathetic score of 8 out of 10. Now let's go into the audio portion of our battle, and back to Jaws. And I, again, sky high, I have to give Jaws a 9.5 in this category. We'll start off with the most obvious part of the audio component of Jaws, and that is the main theme that everybody in the world knows. Whether you've seen the movie or not, you know the theme from Jaws. It's, the recurring series of 2 notes.
Yeah.
That's the main component. I mean, there's more to it, but that's the part that's been, used in everything from other movies to TV shows to commercials to, parodies. It's just permeated the culture, and it kind of set the standard for kind of the usage of theming, of musical theming in films from that point forward. It's not to say that the rest of the score lacks anything, because it's also incredibly high quality. I mean, obviously it's John Williams for both movies, so I mean, you can't really go wrong.
Nope.
But, the theme is like something easy to latch onto and super recognizable. But the music for the other scenes in the movie is perfect. It's, I mean, when they're heading out to sea, it's like right out of almost like a pirate, like an adventure on the seas movie.
Yes.
It just has that, every moment is underscored perfectly, including silence. One of the beauties of the score in this movie is it knows when to be quiet, and it does it like super effectively. There's a lot talked about where the only time you hear the Jaws music, the theme, is when the shark is actually around. When it seems like he might be, it's quiet. Mm-hmm. Like if it's only an unconfirmed moments of his presence that you actually hear the music. But even beyond those moments of silence, like it just lets scenes breathe. It uses silence almost like another, instrument in the ensemble or whatever. So, I mean, that sticks out really strongly to me. High marks for that. I gotta give high marks also to the actual sound design of the movie. It's Academy Award winning, and I think it's really great. Just what it lets you hear, what it wants you to concentrate on, the sound effects. It's very well done, but it's also probably the only area where I guess I got to take a little bit off, because it's the only area where I feel like it got into stuntiness, like gimmickiness. There's a moment where we kind of get a jump scare. We see a severed head, and there's like a blood-curdling woman's scream layered in on top of that.
Yeah.
It's very quick. You almost go, did I hear what I think I heard?
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously not a naturally occurring sound in that moment if you were to see that in real life. And it almost just cheapens it a little bit, I feel like. I mean, the first time you see it, it helps to get you.
Yes, absolutely.
To do that.
Yes.
But I think it hurts the rewatch value. I think it feels a little gimmicky. And then in a similar way, it's important for this other example, but in the context of the film, I don't know that it makes a lot of sense. When Jaws is defeated, as his body kind of sinks down to the bottom of the ocean, over top of it, we hear this kind of like monsterish roaring sound. That's done on purpose. It's also the sound from the movie, Spielberg's earlier movie Duel. And when the truck is defeated, it's in a lot of ways, Jaws is Duel, just with more money and
Yep.
a different type of antagonist. But it's kind of a very same skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought for a long time that I had seen something say that he put it in at the end of Jurassic Park too, when the banner comes down. But apparently I was mistaken. Because I can't find anything about that to back me up. The only time I remember hearing it was on a DVD special feature, so a hunting I go. But, overall, again, the audio, all the elements of audio in this movie are just incredibly well done. 9.5.
All right, well, I'm going down, but again, it's a good score. I'm going 8.5. I know.
How dare you go all the way down there?
You have, I can't disagree with anything you said. I'm going to repeat a lot of what you said. You have the main theme for Jaws. I think the only thing that competes with it in terms of its penetration into pop culture, and the fact that everybody goes dun 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 when their kids do it when they're playing in the pool. Still. You'll hear any movie that's ever had a water scene will do it or try to copy it.
Right.
I think that it has penetrated the zeitgeist of culture more than maybe any other movie score. The only thing competing with it would be the main Star Wars theme and the Imperial March from Star Wars, both also by John Williams. So that could be a debate. So I think you have something that's in the very top of the heap in terms of movie score iconicness.
Yeah.
So
I saw it in an 80s Kit Kat commercial.
there you go. It's everywhere. Everybody knows it, and everybody can figure it out too.
Yeah.
Anybody with no musical talent, maybe just a slight ear, could pick up an instrument and find those notes.
Oh.
Yeah, and just do it again and again. You don't need to be a musician,
right,
or know about music to recreate that. So again, very accessible.
Very everyman, very blue collar.
that has become a repeating theme of this episode. It was how accessible Jaws is to the everyday person.
Smart.
But also I agree with you in other ways. The score in other parts of the movie is very appropriate. The silences, it's a tricky thing because once you get the gimmick, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. But when you're not quite there, those silent moments where there's no shark, mm-hmm, and the fact that it's silent is a dead giveaway. But when you don't know that, you're ready for it. And that's what keeps you on edge. You're leaning into the movie. You're waiting for those moments. So that really helps. And it pulls you right in. And then my last point in terms of the quality of the audio is it goes back to those mundane everyday scenes where he's walking into the sheriff's office and he's having a conversation with different people. The phone rings. Somebody else is walking in. Yep. He's on the street. He's in the hardware store. There's chaos on the beach or on the docks. Those scenes are busy and can be a little chaotic, but nothing is lost.
Nope.
You get every detail you need. You hear everything you need to hear. It all is it seems noisy and chaotic, but actually it's very clear and well organized. And that's a really tough thing to pull off, and not every movie does it. So again, sort of a big boost in terms of the quality of the audio for this movie. So again, not as high as yours, but still a very good score of 8.5.
Can't complain. Let's take a look at the audio now for Jurassic Park, and still with a very, very high score. I got to give it a 9. A lot of the points that I would give Jurassic Park credit for and high marks for are similar to those that we just mentioned for Jaws. Very strong main theme here as well. I mean, not obviously as culturally saturating as Jaws. But I don't know that there's a John Williams scored movie that you cannot walk away humming the main theme or some piece of music from.
Yeah.
And I can't say that about every composer.
No.
And there's, it's kind of nice because there's, it can be argued that there are essentially 2 themes to this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think we all know what we think of when we refer to the main one of Jurassic Park. And it's so appropriately grandiose and sweeping and just perfect for the visual element that it's underscoring, which again, it's, you don't really hire John Williams and not get that. As far as like the other sound design, it's really strong. It's really, I would say, innovative, because it took things that, dinosaurs and other, I guess, elements from a dinosaur environment had been shown on screen before, but not to this level of quality or seriousness or scope. And they, as far as I know, they basically kind of create all their own original sound and effects for this movie. It's not like they just went back to what was dinosaur stock sound, number 3.
Right. Nope.
We're getting things that, and the point is that they did this in a way that was so well executed that you don't question it.
Nope.
I believe every sound. I'm sure there's a scientific argument against everything that they've depicted on here, and in terms of how the dinosaurs, behaved and looked and sounded and the noises and the things they did. But I can watch this movie and totally buy that every dinosaur makes the sound that it does in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, that level of detail carries on to the other environments. This new dinosaur theme park, this game preserve, as you said, it has its own set of unique sounds that populate the world that they built, and they're all exactly, you don't really know what you expect till you see it, but once you hear it, you're like, yeah, that's exactly what it should sound like.
Mm-hmm.
So, across the board, they kind of nail creating a world that you can really suspend your disbelief for.
Yeah.
So, those are the reasons I got to give a 9 for audio for Jurassic Park.
All right, well, my score is going to seem very similar because it is.
Oh.
I'm also giving it a 9. On my end of the board, the 9 is higher than Jaws because I give Jaws an 8.5. On yours, it's a half point lower, but they're all good scores. Before I start, I should mention that it's my fault for stating it wrongly, but I don't want people to get upset or frustrated. We shouldn't really call it a game preserve because nobody's hunting these things.
Well, that's true.
Mr. Hammond,
Safari.
Mr. Hammond calls it a biological preserve, so maybe we'll just stick with that. But anyway, there's a lot. I agree with everything you said. The reason it gives a little bit higher score than Jaws for me is because most of the sound design is as good or better, and the scores are less iconic. But you have these 2 pillars for Jurassic Park. One that is, again, like you said, this grand, rousing thing, and another one that's sort of more melancholy. It's more of a recognition of the majesty of these animals and the impossibility that we'll ever see them, and the mistakes made by the people in this movie who have tried to make it happen. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, what that sort of more melancholy theme is trying to represent. So you have these 2 very strong themes, and you have the sound design, like you said, a mix of noises. The T-Rex roar is now just what you hear in your head with the T-Rex. The raptors screeching. They pulled elephant noises here, and a tiger noise here, and a baboon here, and a gorilla here, mix them all together to create these things. Scientifically speaking, you're right. Most of this stuff is pretty inaccurate. Most dinosaurs, they say, sounded more like a combination of birds and crocodiles. Low grunts and squeals and things like that, depending on the animal. I'm a huge dinosaur nerd. none of the inaccuracies about what a Jurassic Park dinosaur is bothers me in the least.
Right.
Because first of all, they're genetic hybrids, so you can explain it away with that.
True.
You have these amazing sound effects, probably nothing like what you would hear if you could time travel back to 65 million years ago.
Right. Doesn't
Doesn't matter. Effective for what it needs to do in the film. And also, there's chaos in this movie too. And again, similar to Jaws, nothing is lost. You can hear the conversations and the dialogue. You can hear the tapping of feet and the rattling of cages with the dinosaurs yelling, but you can still hear the conversations. You can hear the heavy breathing, the panicked sort of utterances. I mean, everything really is, even the sound effects, the alarm for the fence. Mm-hmm. As Timmy's crawling, it's not a fun sound, but it serves its purpose to disturb you. It's not fun to hear that noise because in that moment, that character is very under duress. And so that unpleasant noise, actually, it's like an alarm clock, it's unpleasant because it's supposed to annoy you enough to get you up. So even a choice like that, where it's like, this isn't going to be fun to hear. That's why they're using it instead of fading away from a choice like that. So
true sound design.
Yes, so I think it was really well pulled off. So yeah, the sound design, the mixes, you have these two iconic pieces of music, maybe less iconic than the Jaws theme, but you have two of them. And when I do the math on all that, I come to a score of 9 for audio on Jurassic Park. All right, that is it for scoring. Some super high scores. We are going to step away, we're going to do our math, and when we come back, we're going to have a winner. All right, we're back, and we have a set of final scores, and we have on our hands here a record-breaking episode. We will give you Jurassic Park's score first. It comes out with an 8.5, the highest score we've seen on the show so far, until now, because Jaws gets the win with an 8.76. Incredible, yes, indeed. They knocked down our previous highs were E.T. and The Fifth Element is just a notch below that. So, our highest scoring episode overall in our 2 highest scoring individual movies. Any first reactions to these scores?
I knew these were going to score very high, do very well. I knew personally for me, Jaws was probably a top 5, maybe even top 3 movie for me going into this. I guess we like Spielberg a bit on this show.
It seems to be the case, yes, indeed. I am not really surprised, I will say, in case it wasn't obvious. Jurassic Park is my favorite movie. I think did I mention that directly earlier? I think I might have been vague about it, but yeah, it's my favorite movie. It's number 1. It's undisputed and unchallenged, etc., etc. But Jaws comes out with the win, and it's okay. I'm okay with that. I'm confident in the defeat because Jaws is a very good movie, and I can't really deny its quality or its pedigree.
Right.
Again, an illustration of how the show works, and sometimes defies our expectations. It's always a good thing to see because it indicates that we're able to maintain a degree of objectivity when we go into these scores that may sometimes be different than our feelings about a movie. Now, in this case, Jurassic Park is an 8.5. It's our highest score we've ever had, again, until Jaws beat it 2 seconds later. So I can't complain either way. Really good contest, 2 really good movies, good director, good music, good everything. Highly recommended. Everybody should see these movies.
Yeah, that's the takeaway. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen either of these movies, you need to.
Yep, and if you haven't, you've heard a lot of spoilers, but don't worry. You'll like them anyway.
Hopefully, you'll see this after.
But all right, so I guess that does it for this episode of Nerd Bomber vs. Movies. Here we are on YouTube. You've obviously already found us here. You can also find us on Instagram at NerdBomberPod, and there you can find links to whatever we're doing individually speaking. That's it for today. For your friend Claude, I've been Just Jamie, and until the next battle,
we're going to need a bigger boat.
Keep kicking.
I used to hate the water.
I can't imagine why.